joyful hello to all of you. My name is Minnku Buttar, founder of the Circle of Joy that brings you self-mastery programs and retreats. It gives me great joy to bring to you this season's talk show, a series of interviews on choosing joy, secrets, and stories from all over the world. It is my diligent attempt to show you that joy is not a hockey-pocky, frivolous concept, but a discipline, a way of life much needed if you want to be resilient, radiant, and unstoppable like a runaway train. So subscribe to my channel so that you can tap into the wisdom of people from all over the world. I will see you there.
Hello to all the lovely souls in different parts of the world. My name is Minnku Buttar, your host from India, and I'm so thankful to each one of you who keep coming back to hear the episodes, to listen, to grow and heal from the wisdom of my guest speakers on the 1st and 15th of each month. Now, the 30th episode of Choosing Joy, Secrets and Stories from Around the World is inspired by Beethoven saying, music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life. So while today's episode is not about piano sonatas and the opera, but I promise you a world of blues to rock and roll through the eyes of my very special guest speaker today. Now, he's a walking, talking encyclopedia of music, a legendary promoter and consultant in the music industry. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, from U2, I think, who in 1976 were just an emerging Irish rock band, with New Order, Take That, and another English pop group from Manchester, to David Bowie. And he calls himself an alien of extraordinary ability and a storyteller extraordinaire. I already love how lyrical it's sounding, and above and beyond all of this, he's true to his Mancunian roots, describing himself as an adopted Yank, but always a Mank. Please join me to welcome my very special guest speaker all the way from St. Petersburg, Florida, Tony Michaelides. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Lovely to meet you, Minnku, and thank you for inviting me on World Smile Day.
Yes, it's amazing. Thank you for reminding me. It's not as if every day is not a smile day for me, and I'm sure for you as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because, it just takes a smile and you light up someone's day, and it's great for yourself as well. So, Tony, I'm so excited to have you. We've had a few conversations between you and I just want to share your wealth of experience, your insider's insights, and the lessons that must have emerged for you working close quarters with the legendary rock and roll stars of that era. Now, before we start, I just have to share and really confirm something. I came across this recently, and I'm very curious. This John Lennon said something, and he said, if you try to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry. So I did a little bit of research, and there were bits and pieces which said that rock and roll industry was actually transformed from the blues to rock by African Americans like Chuck Berry and Sister Rosetta. Is that true? I mean,
well, it is actually. I'm not a rock and roll historian, but I mean, history has it that Chuck Berry kind of invented it, for want of a better word. But it came as a result of from the 40s into it was slightly different. And then, but with the advent of, Chuck Berry and things, it also coincided with the arrival of radio and television and an ability to get your music to people. And those musicians, especially when you look at some of the greatest guitarists that have emerged from, Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton and people, they were all influenced from those people. And another person who was actually white was Bill Haley and the Comets. That was 1954 with Rocking Around the World, But the thing is, what happened from then, Minnku, was what that inspiration did to create the blues stroke, which became this term rock. They lost the roll. It became kind of rock. And then it morphed into they always have to have a genre. You know, it became like, you know, progressive rock or hard rock or something, or indie rock or things like this. They always had to have like a little genre to kind of categorize it to make it acceptable for people. But what coincided with it, because we came out of the Second World War, and then music was a great kind of, you know, thing for people to come together. Because the great thing that what didn't happen in the 50s that kind of resonated and happened in the 60s was it became an instrumental in the civil rights movements and things, because we created protest singers at the same time. And what rock and roll did was it merged people like black and white kids growing up. And it kind of invented teenagers, because I don't know if in the 40s that word existed, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And, you know, I always feel a lot of musicians are put in that position of having a voice. So you can do one or two things. You can abuse it by getting wasted and living the rock and roll lifestyle, or you can make a difference. And that's why rock stars, it's a very loose term nowadays, because, you know, everybody wants to be a rock star.
A rock star.
You know, and it's misrepresentation, because you get people in a position where people hear what you're saying. So there's an amazing program on, I think I mentioned it to you before, on Apple TV, 1971, the year that music changed everything. You had Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? You had, like, you know, I mean, I've got a big poster behind me, Bob Dylan, The Times They Are Changing. You know, even bands like The Who with Won't Get Fooled Again. Everybody was writing songs with a purpose that kids resonated with and were listening. It created a little bit of a barrier between the parents and the kids, because they were all, I mean, my own example was my father used to come in and say, what's this crap you're listening to, you know? And my mum was a big fan of Maria Callas. My dad was into classical music. And then there was all of a sudden this noise where your kids listen to it. Hold on, you know, and all that. But I think there's more than just, I mean, there's that phrase that, you know, when you write that song that means that much to that many, you change the world. And it's been proven that it's changed people's lives. And I think music is an important ingredient in culture. And, you know, I always quote myself as a prime example. It was kind of like, I was really fortunate to get a job that was an extension of my hobby, because I had no idea I was going to enter in the music business. I knew I needed a job to buy records and go to gigs, because that was my passion. The people I kind of hung out with, we all shared the same interests. We went to gigs. It sounds a bit nerdy now, but it was a great way to grow up in you know, just sitting around and listening to music and taking it all in and learning from it. And like everybody, I wanted to be, you know, a rock star myself when I was a kid, like I wanted to be a footballer when I was a bit younger. And then I realized I was no good at that. So I got to resolve myself to the fact that I go a different route.
So I'm going to take you, Tony, at that point, you know, back to your roots. You're talking about your roots, and I know that you're very rooted in your roots. And you call yourself Mank before acknowledging the Yank part, and I love that. I absolutely thought that was brilliant when I read that on your profile. So correct me if I'm wrong, but your reference to your Manchester, that's the reference to your Manchester, England part of your life, right? So tell me a little bit about your association with the world of music. How did it all start? How did you step in while you were back in England?
Well, it's interesting, really, because I went to school. We had a thing called grammar schools in England, where you had to take a thing called 11 plus. And if you didn't pass that, you went to secondary school, which sounds a little demeaning, but the grammar school, you know, I suppose they had better teachers and things, because you had to prove that you were kind of worthy of going into it. But so I went into there aged 11 or something. And that was kind of, you know, that kind of helped shape you in the growing up process and things. But when it came time, they had a thing in England, Minnku, called Further Education College, which was actually perfect for people like me who were done with school but not quite ready for work. So I had 2 years of that doing business studies, which is my least skill. So it did me no good whatsoever, but it killed a bit of time. And then when it became time to leave, and it doesn't mean like, it doesn't say that I wasn't ambitious. It's just that I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had some idea for about half an hour about being a solicitor stroke lawyer, you know, But that kind of fizzled away. But I needed a job to buy records and go to gigs because music was my passion.
Right.
So I got a job, but it was a lousy job. And I used to go in every Monday, and the guy I was sat next to, from a Monday morning, all he could talk about was how long it was before he could go to the pub on a Friday. And he had to listen to that all week. The manager used to come in, he'd send his secretary out to buy flowers for his wife on their anniversary. He'd send somebody out to wash his car. He was like in that position of power. But it just, for me, looking at it as like 19 years of age, I said, I don't want to be you. There's nothing here that makes me want to climb the ladder, because all you are is just in that position of, it's not power in the way I experience power from people that are idolized all over the world. I mean, that came a lot later. It was like, there was nothing there. And strangely enough, going home one night on the train, I happened to pick a copy up of the local paper, the Manchester Evening News. And for some reason, I usually picked up to find out who was playing or, reviews of records and things. But I looked at the classified ads, and there was an advert for a sales representative for this label called Transatlantic. And you get in there thinking, the train was crowded, I'm hanging onto the thing so I don't get, pushed around. And I'm gazing out the window and I'm kind of like, my mind's going somewhere else, because it's almost fantasy. And then I got off the train, I started thinking about it again, got home. Even when I went to bed, I was still thinking about it. Went to work the next day, and there was nothing work was never a distraction. It was but I was drifting. So in the lunchtime, I went to the local HMV store and I rifled through the record collection and I looked at this label, and it was all folk and jazz. But the jazz they had were people like McCoy Tyner and Miles Davis, really great. But they didn't really mean anything to me in as much as it was just taste. I was growing up on, my hair was down here. I was growing up on rock. So I was Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin guy. And I knew nothing about folk and jazz. But I applied for the job and I didn't get it. And I got the standard letter. Thank you for your recent application, blah, 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 blah. Which basically says, tough luck, Buster, you've not landed the job. And then 6 months later, I get a call out of the blue from the sales manager asking me if I'm still interested in the job. And it was like, am I still? Yeah, I am, So he came to Manchester to see me. He went out and had some lunch, and he'd already decided he wanted me. And I started like selling records at the back of the van for £25 a week. I used to go to the major retailers, the big chains in the big cities, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Birmingham, all around the local areas. And I built up, good relationship with the retailers. And I learned a lot about a type of music I didn't realize that I had anything common with. And then in 1976, I kind of moved to another label called ABC Records, which had an extensive country catalogue with Don Williams and people like that. But they also had Steely Dan and a lot of emerging, rock acts. We're talking like mid-70s when progressive rock, as it was termed, was coming in. And I did that. And then in 1978, I got offered a job at my all-time favourite record label, which was Island Records.
Island Records,
And it was so weird, Minnku, because in the 60s, I'd been buying all their records. And then all of a sudden, they're going to give me all their records for free and pay me. How did that happen?
Is that your background? Is that what it is? All that.
These, yeah. I mean,
tell us about that. What is that?
Well, I've given most of these away. These are things like I've got like Whitney Houston, Bodyguard, and Depeche Mode, and it says presented to Tony Michaelides in recognition of 100,000 albums or 500,000 albums. I'm very cynical about it. Because
why
they're not even the records. They're all sprayed, and they have the BPI, the British Phonographic Industry.
So are you saying, Tony, you could actually not take it off the wall and play it? So these are just plaques.
No, it's overstocks out the warehouse that they spray silver or gold. They cost about £70 to make. But I'm cynical in as much as it's the record company's way of saying, take this and don't ask us for any more money.
Oh, seriously.
And the reason they're on the wall is I haven't got enough room in the cupboards to store them.
No, Tony, I'm so suitably impressed. I mean, I have never had a guest speaker who's got this fantastic career completely on his wall to trace his whole career. And then of course, Tony, from what I read, you got an opportunity to meet Led Zeppelin, and then you were only 15. You met.
Well, that was before I got a job in the music industry. That was when I was growing
so
up,
much
going to see
before.
bands.
And what about Bruce Springsteen? Was that also before you
Oh,
started?
Bruce Springsteen. Well, my ex-wife as well, they're both huge Bruce Springsteen fans. So maybe that's why they married me. I don't know,
They're
a little closer to Bruce.
They're very heartland rock style.
Absolutely, yeah. But Bruce is a real, he's a rock star in every sense of the word. He's a man of the people, and he's constantly, I don't know, he's incredibly inspiring, and you can tell he's a guy who's enjoying what he does. He doesn't have to do it for the money and things. But Springsteen came to a U2 concert in 1981.
Okay.
He'd just done the River Tour in England and sent the band back to America and stayed behind to see them. So we let him into the gig. He met the band and everything. And I went backstage and met him myself and got his autograph. And but that was, like I say, meeting him was when I was in the music industry. Meeting Led Zeppelin was when I was a fan. But that was an incredibly pivotal moment in me, because when I got into the music business all those years later, and for a long time, when I had gigs to give away to media people and I had a few left, it was always nice going outside a venue and giving them to some fan who was stood in the pouring rain like this with his girlfriend, or anything, and say, do you want tickets? And I remember once this guy was really suspicious. He went, how much?
Why? Yeah, and why would you?
He said, what do you mean? Nothing. I said, all I want to do is follow me around, because there was touts outside selling tickets for ridiculous prices. And I went to the side and I gave him the tickets so that no touts could see me. And then I said, I'm giving you these, but I'm going to follow you in to make sure that you don't take them and sell them. So I walked in and the guy at the door ripped the ticket off and gave him the ticket stub back. And the guy and the girl looked at me and she ran up to me and threw her arms around me. Like, well, the tickets didn't cost me anything. But what I'm saying is that Led Zeppelin moment about, meeting your heroes. If I could give tickets to somebody that kind of almost changed their world, they will never forget that moment, because they couldn't go to the concert. They couldn't afford the price of the ticket. And they just went on the off chance of, somebody at the last minute selling a ticket cheaper.
That's
which was
incredible.
So it did put a reality check into me, thinking, you can bring so much happiness to people by just, an offer of kindness.
Yes. And I think they'll always remember that. And I think the thing about kindness, Tony, I find is it's a spiral effect. Domino effect. You're kind, it inspires them to be kind, and we pass this tab along. I think it's beautiful. Bless you for really bringing a sparkle in people's life. So now, Tony, you've had such an illustrious career. I mean, and like I was telling you earlier, I'm really notorious for doing such relentless research on my speakers, and I've read your blogs.
Sorry, Minnku, can you give me 1 second? I'm getting blinded by the light, which happens to be the title of the Bruce Springsteen song.
Blinded by the yes, absolutely. I mean, the sun's coming out.
Oh, is that okay? Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
I'd be squinting at you, looking weird.
I couldn't quite see that squint. I thought that was a wink every once in a while, but okay.
My Mancunian charm, madam.
Yes, absolutely. Noted, duly noted. So, Tony, going back to that profile of yours that I'm sort of really impressed, what came through for me is that your life's path seems to be shaped around by the people who made music, people who had the same taste in music. And you've just acknowledged with that example of giving tickets away that you so warmly acknowledged you have been by both your peers and artists and all those kind acts. And you know where I'm going with this, that the time you spent with the legendary David Bowie, that's what I want to talk. What a blessed opportunity, Tony. What I want to know is how big an influence was he, what he stood for in your life, and Was he really different? Because you're the best person to share this with our global audience. They would love to hear.
Different is an understatement, Minnku, because well, here's a couple of little stories around Bowie. For a start, when I went to that further education college,
right,
I just bought Ziggy Stardust, and I remember asking this girl out, and she said yes. So when I went to pick her up on a Saturday night for the first time, in those days, their mother used to throw you in the living room while she was upstairs getting ready, you know. And like the nerd that I was, I rifled through the record collection and I pulled out Hunky Dory. I was 18 years of age. I pulled out Hunky Dory and I thought, oh my God, the girl I'm dating for the first night has got the David Bowie album before the one I've just bought. So naturally, I married her and I had two kids with her. Why wouldn't you do that?
That's how big an influence
but
this
the thing
was.
with Bowie is, I in that period where he broke, because he'd been around for 10 years and he'd had one kind of novelty hit with Space Oddity around the moon launch and all that Buzz Aldrin thing.
Right.
So that was his only hit. And then Ziggy Stardust exploded him. Exploded in well, certainly in England, not in America initially. But he had an immense impact, because the interesting thing with Bowie was that he created a myth of an alien rock star, but he became it. But he was smart enough, because he became a heroin addict and everything, you know, he was like, he became this alien rock star himself in his head, but he was smart enough to kill it off in its prime. And he broke up the Spiders from Mars at its peak. Who in their right mind, when they've waited 10 years for success?
Yes.
But he'd already moved on to the next thing. And the interesting thing with an artist of Bowie's caliber is the fact that if you look at traditionally the history of rock, 27 lost Brian Jones, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. They all died, mostly drug related, because they couldn't stop. You can get anything, drugs, women, where you go to a venue, you go to VIP, you go to buy a record. I don't want your money, you're famous, here, take it, you know, all that adoration around them, and dead at 27. Bowie was smart enough, and we wouldn't be talking about him now if he'd have died then. He'd been literally a couple of hit wonders. But even going back to the 70s, like for instance, the reason Bowie, he had this androgynous thing about him, you know, because he used to tease the press. He manipulated them in a very smart way. He didn't say he was gay or he was straight. He kept them guessing. In America, that was a big no-no. Elton John, George Michael, none of those people came out, because they're even to the extent of the guy, I can't remember, Adam Lambert, who won who was going to win American Idol, announced before the final that he was gay, and he came second. Oh my God. He managed to replace Freddie Mercury in Queen, but he couldn't win American Idol. Do you know what I mean? But what I'm saying, Minnku, is how many kids that were struggling with their sexuality in the 70s did he make feel like they were, you know, relevant in the world?
Yes, relevant.
So he's a cultural icon. He was the first artist to release a record on the internet. He saw the internet changing the music. Then there's a line I mentioned to you before we started about this program on Apple, 1971, the year that music changed everything. Bowie says about 1971, he said it was when we were creating the 21st century. And you know what? He was so right.
Amazing.
When Steve Jobs came in with iTunes, the industry changed. I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to that later. But getting back to your question was, I watched David Bowie split up the Spiders from Mars in front of me as an 18-year-old, and I was mad at him. Wow. Really mad. How can you do this? Where's my next David Bowie record going to come to? I love you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then,
absolutely.
And then 25 years later, I'm having my dinner with him, arranging all his promotion on the road. That doesn't happen to a kid from the north of England. Talk about gratitude.
Yes.
You know, I've never been knighted, but it can't be better.
Yes, I hear that. I mean, gosh.
But you know, I say this to everybody, you know, I talk to, you know, when they bring up, you know, and for me, he's a classic case study, because I'm doing a series of ebooks, lessons learned from rock and roll.
Yes.
And he's the perfect artist to talk to about innovation. Nowadays, reinvention in any business is the only thing that allows you to survive, you know, to move ahead of things. He was doing it before it was even in the dictionary. And the fact is that he even used to have people supporting him when he wasn't at the peak of his career, who would have maybe gone down better than him, but he gave them opportunities.
Amazing.
He was, you know, he had such an impact on so many people for so long. Even when he died, he didn't die until he finished his last album. That was his parting gesture.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it was his 69th birthday, and I think wasn't it Black Star?
Yeah, Black Star, and it was a brilliant record. And he has a song in it where he ends up just going into a cupboard and shutting the door, and he's on, you know, blindfold. He's on like a bed, like shaking like this. It's like, I'm about to go, and it's the most powerful video.
Yeah,
and it wasn't being done for attention and things. But the one thing I will tell you about, you know, and with what you preach at your end, and the you know, the great things that you're doing with your podcasting and your career and your basically outlook on life, I'm sure it translates from home into people you've never met. The biggest artists are the easiest to work with because they realize it's not all about them. It's about a team of people. Bowie, graciousness, humility, you know, appreciation, kindness.
Wow.
He doesn't have to do that. He's David Bowie.
Yeah.
But you feel wanted. And when I got the opportunity to work with him, it was like he likes to meet everybody he's working with. So I went to a show in Manchester and I got introduced to him and this and that, and I got the royal approval. It's almost like the Queen saying, yeah, you can come to the palace, you know.
Yeah.
It's about as big as it gets in rock and roll, as far as I'm concerned.
Amazing.
And then the next day when I go to start my job as such, I never thought it was a job. And I walk into the sound check and he's just having a cigarette waiting for the drums to be sound checked and things. And he waves and says, hey, Tony, you know, how many people does David Bowie know that you should remember my name?
Egoless, completely.
Yeah. And the thing is, he had such a powerful impact on the industry as such. I mean, how many people wanted to be David Bowie, you know, like an inspiration, icon, and a legend in every sense of the word. So, you know, people use this loosely termed rock star thing, but there's a difference because we live in an age of instant gratification, you know, all these like one-hit wonders and people who, you know, American Idol, where you get a bunch of people like that. And what they want, Minnku, is they want fame and attention. You know, he didn't do it for that. Because he learned from mime artists, you know, and he crossed over so many things, you know, like Andy Warhol. He went to Berlin to make a trilogy of albums at a period in his career that it felt the right thing to do, you know. And the beauty of it is he met his soulmate and the woman of his dreams, like at the end, and, you know, in the last, you know, 15 years or whatever, you know, but they had a child together. And David Bowie became a dad, which he wasn't able to do in the freak out 70s with Angie. He called his son Zowie, you know, who is now Duncan and he's a film producer himself.
Oh,
but he took time out when he had a kid to bring his kid up. He did the most normal things. And the thing is just to listen to people interviewing him and stuff, you know, because the tour that I did with him was the small venues. And one guy that interviewed him said to him, last time you played in the Midlands, which is the middle of the UK, he said, this guy said to him, you did Aston Villa Leisure Centre to 30,000 people. And today you're playing to 900 people at Nottingham Rock City. He said, why? And he looked at me, he said, because I can.
Absolutely.
That was so cool. That's not arrogant. Meaning
it's
like,
not.
I'm in a position of doing what I want. Why shouldn't I play? You know, and that's what I mean. Those messages resonate with people. I don't forget that 30 years ago. I mean, I can't really turn my computer around, but all this behind me is one thing. All this is signed artwork. I'm stood in front of a poster that says to Tony, best wishes, Bowie 97. That means more to me than all these. Because he was leaning over me when he signed it. I had one of the weirdest days of my life when he died, because I woke up at 4 a.m. I turned the TV on and I was, you know, like this, rubbing my eyes, you know. And there's a caption, David Bowie dead at 69. And I'm like, and I got up to make some coffee and I was bumping into things. And I was totally disorientated. It was almost like losing a family member because of who he was.
Yeah.
And then I'd get my phone and it's texts, emails, messages, you know. The local TV station came round to interview me. The local paper wanted to interview me about him. And it was like overwhelming. And I just wrote back, I said, listen, guys, I appreciate you have deadlines to meet and stuff. Can I just have a little time to grieve?
Yeah.
You know, it was like overwhelming. And it was like, you know, and then, you know, guy comes in and you know, you're filling up as you're talking to people. And then I remember the local news station here. I showed them the video to Black Star. And I wish I'd have had that moment filmed myself, because there was only like a female camera person, the guy who interviewed me and me, but we're all huddled over my iPad watching this, and you know, nobody said a word. It was so powerful.
Yeah.
And it was like Bowie's way of individually saying goodbye to everybody.
Wow. That's
It's like there won't ever be. I mean, if you see my website and stuff, I have these are my own little, you know, quotes.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on a mission to help keep the legacy alive of some of the greatest artists that ever lived. He won't be replaced. And I'm not being nerdy about it or anything. I'm just saying that, you know, this guy made a difference.
It's what he stood for, Tony. I mean,
absolutely.
What a legend. I think he blurred genres and opened minds across the globe.
Yeah.
And these are precious memories, and you're so blessed, absolutely blessed, Tony, to do that. Well, you know, while I can really, being honest, I'm not a rock and roll addict as such, you know, especially now, the loudly crank blaster, you know, you have, I was really doing my research, and I went, and it took me into Dirty Honey and the Hot Chili Peppers and the Arctic Monkeys. And I'm just not cut it, but give me David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes or Changes. I mean, I listened to Changes just last night. It's one of my favorites. It's what I call a little sane one, because you get to see David Bowie with his features without the dramatic makeup and his attire. But Tony, tell us, you know, with such fond memories, how if you wanted to, you know, really encapsulate all that you said, how was the music business as such back then different, and what has changed over the years with the rock stars then and now? What's changing?
Well, you know, when I was growing up, I mean, for instance, you know, adolescent girls and things, they'd have like pop stars all over their walls, you know. It was them discovering boys and things like that, you know, and they were kind of idolized. I think you should have idols, you know, and I think you should have mentors, you know. Those are the people that kind of, you shouldn't necessarily want to be them, but it can help shape where you go and what you do by the ideals that they preach. And that got replaced by footballers like David Beckham and stuff. But the thing is, a lot of things kind of, for instance, the reason I'm here is, you know, Steve Jobs, who was, in every sense of the word, an influencer and a rock star, because he came and he brought that idea of iTunes to the record companies, because when Napster came along, which was like downloading, the record companies have always thrived on greed. It took them 30 years to realize there would never be anybody as big as the Beatles again. But they had different formats, cassettes, 8 tracks, and then CDs came in. And the artists were persuaded to take a lower royalty rate because of a new format. Well, the biggest expense in making a record is recording it. All these records were already made. So it was like money, you know, but they made their money on albums. There's no money for them to make in selling songs. But Steve Jobs took the idea to the record companies and they brushed it away. So he went away and did it himself. And at that time, BMG, I was working for BMG, which was Irish Sun RCA. So I was doing Whitney Houston, Bowie, you know, Tony Braxton, TLC, a lot of big artists. And they, to save money, they brought it in-house. Well, I was running like an 8-10 man operation or something with company cars, premises. You were renting, you were hiring your photocopying machine for like £120 a quarter, which you can buy for £30 now, or $30, you know. So it was expensive, but we were getting paid by the record companies. So like I said, I'm not a businessman. But, you know, the thing, I'm kind of, in a weird way, proud of myself, in as much as And that's what I mean about mentors and influencers. I did my Ziggy Stardust. I came to America to reinvent myself in the same way that he crushed Ziggy Stardust in its prime. I'd worked with a lot of major artists, and pretentious as it sounded, I suppose in a way I wanted to keep my little legacy intact. And I didn't want to just pick up the scraps that were left and work from the edge of my bed with a mobile phone and lay a load of people off. I wouldn't have enjoyed it. So I came out with an entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, I call it flying by the seat of my pants. I don't call it entrepreneurial because, you know,
I
they
like
the
your
English
twist
accent.
on life.
they like, you know, they like the English accent. I might do an odd Ford commercial or something, you know, but I didn't really have anything. But I did have the strength and determination to think, you know what, there was no music schools to educate you into the music business. I say this to people, it's not a how to do business. Yeah. You know, if you've got a problem with your electrics, get an electrician. If you need a new bathroom, get a plumber. If you want your car doing, get a mechanic. You need to know how those jobs, there are no two bands, no two labels, no two artists are the same. It's not a how to do business. And I wrote in my first book, I said, to work with them, you have to get inside their head. You have to think like them. And then I say, but don't stay there too long.
It'll mess you up.
But, you know,
there's a lot going on. Yeah.
I always think that there was, am I getting way off the subject here? What was the question?
No, don't worry. It's fascinating. And I always say this, Tony, that, you know, what you're speaking is what probably people want to hear about. I mean, how many people out there can actually talk about this with, you know, you are a perfect example of what people have now coined as ikigai. You had your passion, purpose, and profession married to each other. So,
but you know,
absolute congratulations. There's one other thing, Tony, though, I just want to say, and I'm coming back to what you said. I'm completely going back to what you said. You also, you know, the Tony that we know today, you said that the reputation is born out of pride and integrity. And I think that's how you have lived your life, right? The legacy you talk about, right?
It's funny, you know, because like I say, I got offered when it was the early 80s, and Island Records laid 5 of us off. We were the regional promotion people covering regional radio and TV and press, but they had a cash flow problem. So they laid us off. It was really hurtful. And then I got a job literally 20 minutes later for A&M Records, for Charisma, working with the Police and Genesis, working with Genesis and Peter Gabriel, which at the time, apart from Bob Marley, was probably the biggest artist I'd ever worked with, because U2 hadn't broken then. They weren't even signed. So I went back to Island Records. I mean, who does that? A label that's already laid you off once, you go back to. But it didn't work in as much as I was working. The salespeople were doing sales and promotion. Again, it was a cost efficient way for them to do things, but it didn't work for me because I, you know, if I wanted them to go and cover a television somewhere down south, they were 50 miles away doing some shops. So I was getting on and off planes 5, 6, 7 days a week, you know. And then I got a call from A&M Records offering me, you know, a job there. And I was fiercely loyal to Ireland. So again, I didn't want to leave a label that had already laid me off. And the guy said, well, why don't you come down? I mean, then the Police were the biggest band in the world. Every Breath You Take, you know, that whole period.
Oh, absolutely loved them. Yeah.
And, you know, the guy said to me, well, why don't you come down and at least we'll have a chat, you know. So he went down and he put a few ideas in my head, one of those staring out the window moments on the train again. And I got home, and then he phoned me up and I said, yeah, I'll take it. So he said, when are you moving to London? I said, no, I'm not moving to London. And I remember it vividly. At the time, I was looking out my kitchen window. My wife was pregnant. Our little 3-year-old girl was in the paddling pool with her mates. And I didn't want to go and live in a bedsit in London and go to gigs 7 nights a week.
Right.
So what I did was I created my own, I kind of invented regional promotion. So I said to the guy, I'm not moving to London. He said, well, you've got to move to London. I said, I don't have to do anything. I mean, I was almost jeopardizing the possibility of a great job, you know. So then I went back to Ireland and said, listen, I want to set up independently and I'll still work for you, but I want to work for A&M as well. And then it kind of all escalated from there, because I picked up like Mute Records, which was Depeche Mode, New Order were in my own hometown, Factory Records and things. And it kind of grew from them, from me being in an office, giving a girl £25 a week to answer the phone just to say, he's not in, you can get him on his mobile. But going back even further to 1974, when I got that job, because don't forget, I was still working 200 miles away from the nerve centre of the music industry, i.e. London, like it is in every major country. But, you know, I got a job then, £25 a week. I went out, Minnku, every day to prove to that guy it was the best decision he'd ever made.
He has made. Wow.
You know,
incredible.
And I went out and I was at my first call at 9 o'clock. Listen, I could have laid in bed, just made a few calls, filled in a few forms, had 2 days off, you know, lived the life, put everything on my expense account. But it was, I said it in my book, it was a job that I never expected, that I would never let go. When I brought people in, you see, my favorite topic, if you like, in the music industry is artist development. And like I said, with you too, I got them their first TV, their first radio session, and I was learning my trade as they were learning theirs, you know. And I remember taking them to their first interview, and I can't believe I said this, maybe it was the Greek philosopher in me coming out. I had Bono on the edge of the back of the car. It was pouring with rain. We stopped outside the radio station. I turned the windscreen wipers off. I leant back. I said, listen, guys, and I got 2 nervous kids in the back, excited about the first interview. I said, listen, I can get you in here because of who I know. Only you can get yourselves back in here because of who you are. So I sent them in with motivation. I didn't realize that. I mean, I listen to it now and it's like, did I really say that? You know,
you did.
The thing is, I always, like I said, on the one hand, there's no training for a job like this, because it involves relationships and the real world,
and
because
pride.
you're out there. Yeah. And I would say a psychology degree would be a lot better when you work with musicians, because like I say, they think differently, not in the Steve Jobs way. And it works the other ways, where you have like, they become, I won't use the word, but they become the people you don't want to work with. But the other thing, the other thing is, you have to remember this. So you have, like, there's a quote from Doc McGee, who used to manage Motley Crue. Well, that must have been like, you know, they were maniacs. But Kiss and a whole bunch of Bon Jovi. And he said 90% of rock stars have less than a high school education. They wave their hand in one direction and 30,000 people wave their hand in the same direction, and they feel power.
Yes.
And that's the same people that go back to a hotel room and they can't get a steak sandwich at 3 a.m. and they go berserk and they pick a TV up and throw it out the window. You can't give me a sandwich at this time. It's like, do you know who I am kind of feeling. But you know, the other thing is that I learned, and to my own credit, is that moment when somebody they've worked with for a long time and you're at a gig and there's a huge stadium waiting to see them, and they've got to entertain, but they're just a little not themselves. Well, instead of saying, what's your problem? And stuff like that, sometimes it's putting an arm around them and saying, you okay? Are you all right? Because you know what? That guy's wife, I say guys because most of, you know, the rock band, guys,
generic,
their wife, his wife might have had a kid, right? And he's been on tour for 3 months. He's in Japan, he's in Australia, wherever. He'd much rather be at home watching a movie and having a pizza, being with his kid and his wife, than being adored by 30,000 people he doesn't know. So that's when compassion comes in, and understanding, and allowing them, you know, to realize that there aren't people around them that just want something from them, because there's so much greed. Any industry that brings a vast amount of money generates a lot of greed, and certain things don't change, especially now, you know, because record companies are run by corporate. They're run by accountants and lawyers. I learned from music people. I learned from people who were releasing records that were good enough to have in their record collection. And you get a chance to grow with the artists. I still get shivers up my back when I saw you two play in a pub in Manchester to like 11 people. Yeah. And 4 of those people came with me. Amazing. And then I don't see them play into a stadium. Yeah. And it still sends shivers up. I mean, I kind of had a feeling they do well, but I didn't know they do quite that well.
So well. Yeah. So, yeah, Tony, it's amazing. I think who you are today, you know, you picked up on nuances for the people you worked with, and you know, obviously there's pride, there's integrity, there's respect, and there's merit where you're concerned. I could just talk and listen to your stories, but we've only got, you know, that much time. I just will
Can I
have
just
to.
tell you one? Can I tell you one thing that I learned with the artist
I was
development?
just going to thank you so much. Yes,
Oh, right.
tell us what's formed
it
and
doesn't-
molded you today,
It
Tony.
doesn't begin and end with nobodies becoming somebodies on an artistic level. Like you two, I have another ebook I'm going to do, Preparing for Success, because they decided when they were preparing for the school disco to share all the publishing. So don't have that conversation when the money's coming in, because it splits bands up when the singer and the guitarist are making more money. I never employed anybody in my 25 years of having my own company or something, of anybody who'd ever worked in the record industry. I just employed people who I thought had that certain something. And it took me back to that moment where that guy offered me a job.
Yeah, beautiful.
For £25 a week, you know, and I gave him one piece of advice: whatever you screw up on, I'll pull you out of. Meaning we worked with Simon Cowell for 7 years, you know, so you'd have to take those calls when he was like bombarding you with do this, do that, blah, blah, blah. And I'd take, yeah, let's get on with the rest of the day. But the thing is, I had 3 people who went on to form their own promotion companies. I had a guy who connected with my ex-lodger who worked for the BBC for 40 years. They did the breakfast show on national radio in the UK for a while. He's still on the radio there. My intern who phoned me up from Cardiff and said she wanted to come and work for me and move to Manchester. And I said, there's no room at the inn. You know, she came to work for me for nothing. And then I employed her. Then she went to work with Simply Red. She went to manage Coldplay.
Wow.
I was the first opportunity I gave her in the music industry, because I thought, you know, she said, I'll work for you. Nothing. I said, well, I can't say no to that, but I'll tell you something. I said, you were making cups of tea.
Amazing, Tony. That's
making cups of tea. But guess what? I make cups of tea as well. Meaning, like, you know, you muck in and you do everything that we all do. I mean, delegation is a great thing, but don't ever give somebody something that you wouldn't do yourself.
Do yourself. So you have to lead.
That applies to everything, you know, and that's why I relate that to that guy who was the office manager in my first job. No inspiration, no motivation, no desire to grow that ladder. But in my own world, I could kind of, it takes a lot of courage, I think. You know, I look at it now and I won't, I know you've got a limited time span, but all I would say with that.
That's okay. It's fascinating, Tony.
All I would say in that was you have to make, in a way, the world that you want to be in. So you know, you find yourself building relationships that last. And the pandemic's been really interesting as well, in as much as there's people I haven't spoken to or seen for 2 years that I haven't actually missed. And it's like, good luck with the rest of your life, but you're not really part of mine, because, and that's not being rude, it's just that, you know, you kind of realize the people that are exceptionally special in your world and the ones that kind of come and go. But I developed a lot of good relationships and learned a lot. And I always say to people didn't play my records because they liked me. They listened to them because they respected me. They knew I had a job to do. And my job was to feed back what people thought of that music, because that helps the manager, the label, you know, the artist and everything. So I learned a lot of, I call it life lessons, because I have, like I have that lessons learned from rock and roll. I'm working with another guy and we're going to do kind of the ingredients of greatness, you know.
Yeah. What is your second, the book that's coming up? You've done.
Well, the book I've got at the moment is Moments That Rock, which is about me growing up and some stories that went along the way. It's kind of a mini adventure. I wanted to keep the lessons separate, because the lessons, like for instance, here's one. They call Bruce Springsteen the boss, right? So why do they call him the boss? He's had the same band for over 40 years. The only 2 that aren't in it have died. So how come Mr. New Rockstar, the developers, how come you leave your job every 2 years to double your salary? How come this guy has kept the same staff for 40 years? Incredible. It's a great lesson in staff retention. Yeah. And it applies to corporate America. It doesn't apply to the E Street Band. Do you not think those guys could get a job?
Like that. I like that annotation and that relationship between how you can translate it to the corporate world. Where, Tony, where can people grab a copy, and where can they get in touch with you if they wanted to?
Well, there's two things. It's funny, actually, because my book's out on Amazon. The publishing company's in England. So if I had a guy buy it in England, it cost him more in postage than the actual price of the book. So I got them to cancel it.
Okay.
If you want a signed book, you can go to my website. There's a page, info@TonyMichaelides.com. It is available on Amazon, but you can't get it signed on Amazon. You know, if you're a Prime member, you get it the next day. If you buy it from me, you know, PayPal, I'll sign it personally and I'll get it to you. And like I say, there's kind of, I'm getting more active on social media. I'll tell you one thing, Minnku, which is weird, is I'm really not very good at promoting myself, but I'm getting better.
We've talked about that, you and I.
I like to do a few reels and, you know, just kind of, you know, it's,
I think, Tony, everything that you stand for, everything you've spoken, like I said, there's pride, integrity, and authenticity, and I think just wait for the magic to unfold. And I see a lot of value in what you're doing, and I sincerely thank you, Tony, for taking us through such a beautiful place where everything you said was music without words. How does it feel being here today, Tony?
I love it. What, you mean America or with you?
No, with me on the show.
This is great, because I find, you know, in the nicest possible way, I find things like this challenging, because you're not just talking about that glamorous world of music, because a lot of the people just see the glamour. They don't see the blood, sweat and tears.
Right.
I mean, I always go back and thinking, and I don't really think, because it's not until the roller coaster ends that you sit back and think, wow, that was quite a ride.
Quite a ride.
And I think that's when appreciation sets in, and gratitude. I'm not saying I didn't have it, but if I worked out, I was probably earning $5 an hour in the amount of hours I was putting in. But it was a passion, and you had an ability to change people's lives. Because if you introduce them to music that means something to them, and like I say, when you write that song, blah, 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 and it does have an impact on people. How many people have been put a set of headphones on and it saved their life or something, because it's taken them somewhere where the pain and suffering goes? I know it sounds a bit kind of hippish, but it's proven. I have a book here by a doctor in England. It's called The Music Diet, and how music is important for the mind and soul and things, because it's a healing component.
It is, you're right. Music can heal. And it doesn't matter what language, right, Tony? Because it's not even the lyrics, it's not even the melody, it just somehow speaks to Tony. This episode tell me, you have more to say. Tell me, Tony.
No, one thing, because the other thing is it takes you to the dark moments. Bob Dylan wrote Blood on the Tracks when he's splitting up with his wife, and it's a monumental album. Adele, she wrote like Hello and tracks like that are just unbelievable and will last forever.
Incredible.
When a marriage was breaking up. So heartache creates inspiration to pass on to people. So if you reach that person who's having a hard time, you think, you know what? Adele and Bob Dylan had a hard time. Why shouldn't I?
Yeah.
And it's not the money that gets them out of it.
Yeah.
The ability to have an expressive way of relating words.
Yeah.
And that's where it resonates with people, because it does change their lives.
Yes. And thank you for being the person and, you know, bringing it to the fore, because you've been on that side and now you bring it to everyone else who didn't have an opportunity. Thank you, Tony, so much.
Thank you. And I want to apologize for having given you too much to edit.
I actually do not edit most of my shows. Right. They are authentically presented as recorded. I just think there is a message that needs to come out, and it does. So thank you so much. And now, with your permission, if we can quickly jump into the rapid fire. It's not called rapid fire for nothing.
Go, girl.
So short and concise, one sentence, one word. And with your permission, shall we go with the first one?
Fire away.
Okay. Joy for you is what?
Joy for me is you know, staying positive, surrounding myself with people that you give as much as you get out of, everything from a little bit of banter to caring and understanding and things. And, you know, we live in an age where people are losing the plot. So to retain sanity by surrounding yourself with people that bring the best you.
Absolutely. They make you the best version. One instrument that you would have liked to learn but didn't in this lifetime?
What physical instrument?
Yes, one physical instrument.
Well, I did have that period of trying to be in a band, but realizing that I wasn't good enough. So I did play bass guitar for a while. I suppose I would like to have, I think if looking at it as an older person now, I think probably I'd say piano, because you could sit behind something and, you know, articulate what's going on in your head. You know, I was brought up on guitar players. I've always liked guitar bands.
You're right there in front.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, this next question coming up for you. And if life was a glass bowl and you're given a chance to put two aspects of life that you always wanted, what would you put in that glass bowl, which is like a lifeline?
I think I'd sling authenticity into that, because I always say to people, you know, I have another phrase, first impressions count. People remember the way you were the first time they met you. And sadly, that translates into a lot of things. You know, if you've been in an abusive relationship and somebody's hit you, they will hit you again. It might not be tomorrow, next week, next year, but it will happen. So authenticity, I like to, you know, I always used to say to people in the industry, if you think I'm the biggest jerk you've ever met, I won't let you down next time, because I'll be just... So I would say authenticity.
And the second?
The second would be the power of relationships, really, because I think those things get you through life, the people that you have around you, because they're always there for you. You don't have to ask anything. And I like to reach out to people, and we all have periods of struggle. And it shows people that there are people that care rather than want something out of you.
That's amazing. I think I totally 100% resonate, and that's what I do. You know, I run self-mastery programs, and the first thing I do is authenticity and courage, because it takes courage.
Courage is another good one.
Yes, it takes courage to be authentic. It takes courage to call a spade in a relationship. So I think both those things that you said, courage kind of ties them up. Beautiful. Tony, that's it. It's a wrap.
I thought it was 5. That's 4, wasn't
it? Well, I just took
one. I think it was Bowie, was it? We did Bowie.
Yeah. But thank you so much. This was just so awesome to have you.
No, I loved it. I really appreciate your time.
Yes, and love to have you back another time. So join me, Tony, to say bye to our global audience.
Bye, you circle of joyous.
Bye.
You've got a good lady here presenting. Stay tuned. There'll be more. Not from me.
And to everyone out there, you beautiful listeners, if you haven't liked and subscribed the YouTube channel, please go out there and do so that you receive notifications. Love you all. And as you know, I'm vested in bringing beautiful messages and wisdom out to you on the 1st and 15th. Stay blessed, stay safe, and be a beautiful contributor to the universe. Bye now. Bye, and thank you, Tony. Catch you again.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.